I start? Okay. Well, I don't think that I need to introduce myself again, but I am going to do that. My name is Eugenia Trigoso, and I am working as a bone marrow transplant nurse for several years. I work in the Hospital La Fe in Valencia, Spain. I am not able to make bigger my presentation, so I am going to do like this. Marifo, tell me if you are able to see my next slide.
Yes, thank you.
It is okay now?
Yes,
Yes?
introduction.
Okay. Why is sorry for this problem? Why is so important the nutritional status in bone marrow transplant? First, we have to think about that the children, when they arrive to the bone marrow transplant, they have several months behind them of treatment, radiotherapy, and more things. So when they arrive to the bone marrow transplant, so many times the nutritional status is not the best that we need, but we have to think about that the poor nutritional status is a significant problem for patients undergoing blood and marrow transplantation, and that lead the increased morbidity and sometimes the mortality also. The high dose of chemotherapy or radiation required for marrow transplant can cause side effects like nausea, vomiting, and mucositis, which reduce the food intake. But addressing malnutrition through nutritional support, such as enteral nutrition, is crucial to improve patient outcome, reduce complications, and shorten hospital stays. So, but why? Why is nutritional status of patient undergoing hematopoietic stem cell transplant so important? Because all patients undergoing bone marrow transplant are at an increased risk of malnutrition in the phase before transplantation and afterward, as I said before. They have a lot of treatment before to arrive to the bone marrow transplant. And we have to think that both obesity, that means body mass index, bigger than 30 kilos per meter square, or undernourishment, that means body mass index less than 18 kilos per meter square, have been considered as risk factor for complication and increased relapse or non-relapse mortality in bone marrow transplant recipients. But also, the malnourished children, they have an increased risk of death in the early post-bone marrow transplant period. All of you know, the early period is in the day plus 30. Are less likely to tolerate surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy and infection as well, and are also hospitalized longer, have a diminished quality of life, and lower survival rates. So, while nutrition support remains an essential aspect of supportive care, the range of nutrition support options is now as varied as the setting of hematopoietic stem cell transplant. They have a lot of different among centers. On this paper from the Pediatric Disease Working Party, that is a group of the European Society for Blood and Marrow Transplantation, the aim of this paper is to harmonize the supportive care provided during the pediatric transplant in Europe. The Pediatric Disease Working Party of the EBMT promotes dedicated workshops during the years 2017 and 2018, and afterwards have been reviewed. So they established a consensus representing the recommendation for a standard of care that reflects current practice in highly experienced European pediatric transplant centers. This paper describes the resulting consensus of the management of enteral and parenteral nutrition during the bone marrow transplant. We have to be aware that nurses participate have an important role in this paper. So in this paper, we said that enteral nutrition is generally encouraged in order to preserve the natural microbiota, thus reducing the risk of graft-versus-host disease, and possibly the speed of platelet recovery. Traditional certain dietary items have been widely restricted to reduce the risk of introducing harmful foodborne microorganisms to the patient, of course. It's for that reason that we need a neutropenic diet, which is increasingly questioned. Not everybody agrees on how important is the neutropenic diet. So data on the effect of a neutropenic diet in pediatric transplant patients is lacking to date. But the superiority of a strict neutropenic diet was not demonstrated yet. But what is the why and how on all this business? So it's important to know that the catabolic effects of high-dose chemotherapy, the total body irradiation, and graft-versus-host disease combined with the limited oral intake in the peri-transplant period or before due to anorexia, nausea, vomiting, mucositis, and multiple organ dysfunction necessitate an intensive approach. And also, apart from the potential psychological impact and discomfort associated with the tube feeding, the absolute need for and benefit of parenteral nutrition remains always controversial. The enteral nutrition preserves the gut trophism, supports the barrier function of the gut, and thereby reduces the risk of bacterial translocation, have a trophic effect of the gut, and continuation of nasogastric feeding during the period of maximal gut toxicity may accelerate the healing. But what is the algorithm for selecting the route for nutritional support? Well, what gastrointestinal tract can be used safely? If the gastrointestinal tract can be used safely, okay, in that is we can't use this, we can go to the parenteral nutrition. But if we can use this, we have to go to the alimentation longer than 8-12 weeks. Okay, if not, we have to go to the nasogastric tube. Or if yes, we can go to enterostomy tube. If the patient has vomiting or there are a risk of aspiration, if yes, they have to go to the nasovaginal tube. But if yes, we have to go to gastrointestinal bleeding. Okay, the adequate nutrient delivery and activating goals for weight, we can have an adequate nutritional delivery. If not, we have to adjust the feeding or supplement with parenteral nutrition. Or if yes, we have continued with the tube for feeding. So after this, we have to decide what is the most important indication for total parenteral nutrition and the risk, and the same for enteral nutrition and the risk for this. For the total parenteral nutrition indication, in what case we have to indicate the total parenteral nutrition? When we have a severe malnutrition at admission. And also if we have a weight loss more than 10% during the treatment, or the impossibility of oral feeding or failure to meet 60 or 70% of requirement over 3 days. And what is the risk for the total parenteral nutrition? The most important risk that we always have in pediatric patients is the fluid overload. We also have the hepatic dysfunction. We have to increase the risk of subclavian vein thrombosis. It could increase the catheter-related associated infection. Also, the total parenteral nutrition suppresses the normal appetite. if they have a prolonged gastrointestinal failure, could be considered and reduce the intestinal trophism. But what happens with the enteral nutrition indication? When the graft is functioning normally and the gastrointestinal tract is not affected, in that case, is when we have to indicate the enteral nutrition. The enteral nutrition is useful as a transitional phase between parenteral nutrition and oral intake. But what is the risk for enteral nutrition? Is the nausea, vomiting, the oroesophageal mucositis, aspiration, bleeding, diarrhea, sinusitis, and bowel perforation. In patients with graft-versus-host disease involving the gastrointestinal tract should receive total parenteral nutrition until the stool volume decreases to less than 500 milliliters a day for 2 consecutive days. And also, the total parenteral nutrition should be progressively decreased while increasing the feeding by the oral route. And when the patient can take more than 50% of daily energy requirement for more than 5 days. In that case, the total parenteral nutrition should be completely withdrawn. But what is the difference between one and the other, more than the route? The parenteral nutrition is the treatment of choice for nutritional support of patients undergoing allo bone marrow transplant following myeloablative condition. In 2006, the European Society for Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism did not recommend the enteral nutrition and preferred parenteral nutrition in bone marrow transplant patients because of no proven effect upon the tumor response to treatment, therapy, associated side effects, graft survival, acute graft-versus-host disease, and overall survival. But also the parenteral nutrition has been considered traditionally the method of choice for providing nutritional support for patients undergoing bone marrow transplant, although there are no data to support the theory that hematological and immunological recovery are accelerated by the intravenous feeding. Nowadays, most of the time, what we do is to make in place a nasogastric tube in the day -1 because we think at that moment the mucositis has not been started yet. And we always think that the nasogastric tube don't have to be introduced when the mucositis have started. But what is the risk? As we said before, the total parenteral nutrition have some risk for the patient. More likely to lead the complication, including the volume overload, as we said before, the hyperglycemia, venous thrombosis, and infection. And also the financial cost for intravenous feeding, while of secondary importance, but also adds some burden to an already costly program. Well, but how we are going to administer the total parenteral nutrition? Okay, we are going to administer always or almost always via central venous catheter. It could be done also for peripheral catheter, but the composition of the parenteral nutrition will be different. We need a tunnel central venous catheter is indicated for patients requiring total parenteral nutrition. Total parenteral nutrition is associated with higher rates of infection because the nutrients support microbial growth. During long-term catheter use for total parenteral nutrition and intraluminal biofilm or a catheter tip fibrin, sheath or tail, and thrombosis created site for microbial seeding and infection. Furthermore, lipid contamination, glycemic change, and breakdown of gastrointestinal mucosa related to lack of enteral feeding have been suggested as possible contributors to the risk of infection in patients receiving total parenteral nutrition. What happened with enteral nutrition indication? Our early enteral tube feeding might be considered as a fair option in the nutritional support of children undergoing myeloablative conditioning or allo bone marrow transplant, while parenteral nutrition should be used only as a rescue option and when possible in combination with enteral nutrition. The few data in the literature assume that enteral nutrition may decrease early complications in allotransplant, notably infection and immunological issues, and decrease the day plus 100 mortality. And when the graft is functioning normally and the gastrointestinal tract is not affected, we have to use the enteral nutrition. It's very useful at the transitional phase between parenteral nutrition and oral intake. But the enteral nutrition also have a risk. There is a risk that a lack of experience in some centers regarding nutritional enteral administration after allo bone marrow transplant may result in non-optimal use of enteral nutrition and lead to underestimation of enteral nutrition efficacy and tolerance. But also the nasogastric tube insertion and enteral tube feeding in children receive bone marrow transplant can be accomplished with minimal complication and significant cost saving when compared with the total parenteral nutrition, which is more expensive. Where possible, we have to use of intravenous fluids and oral diet should be considered preferential to parenteral nutrition. But what happened with the neutropenic diet? We have been talking about this, but what is this? Condition-associated nausea and mucositis generally lead to a reduction of the appetite and oral food intake during bone marrow transplant, especially during neutropenic phase. There is a considerable variation in practice in dietary restriction of a specific food item between different bone marrow transplant centers. However, the growing body of evidence of the lack of benefit of a neutropenic diet has led to an increasing number of cancer centers replacing the strict neutropenic diet with safe food handling guidelines. That nowadays, a safe food handling guideline is more relevant than the neutropenic diet. As 4 essential steps that mean clean, separate, cook, and chill are highlighted. Detailed recommendations regarding washing hands and surface. How to prevent cross-contamination from one food product to another. We have to separate them. How to cook different food items to save temperature. And how to refrigerate properly are given. Here we can see how we can handle food items during allogeneic hematopoietic cell transplantation. We have to hand and prepare the food items in different steps. First, we have to clean, wash hands like always, and surface often. Rinse fruit and vegetables, and wrap firm skin fruits and vegetables under running tap water. We have to separate raw meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs from other foods to avoid cross-contamination. in the refrigerator using different cutting board and raw food and ready-to-eat food. And also to cook. Cook in the safe temperatures. Consider using a food thermometer to measure the internal temperature. And to chill, refrigerate plenty and follow cold storage in the different chart or the refrigerator, always below 4 degrees, and freezer, always less than 16 degrees. Never thaw food at room temperature. And we have to select the lower risk option of food items. That the low risk is washed fresh vegetable, including lettuce, salad, and cooked vegetable. And that is the low risk, but what is the high risk is unwashed fresh vegetable, including all of them. And a low risk will be we have to cook the meat sufficiently, and the poultry also, the seafood and eggs, canned fish and seafood, pasteurized milk, egg, and egg products. And what could be the high risk? Raw or undercooked meat, poultry, seafood, and pasteurized milk, hot dogs, and lunch meat that have not been rated. So sushi is not allowed for a few months. What more? Total parenteral nutrition versus enteral nutrition. We have the pros and cons, and we have to summarize a bit this. The most important things for the total parenteral nutrition, so many times, is the care of the central line. Because, as we said, they can increase the catheter-related associated infection, and also the fluid overload, and the reduction of intestinal trophism. If we talk about enteral nutrition and the tube feeding, they have a easy management, even at home. It's always easy for oral medication administration. All these medications that they have a bad taste could be administered by the tube feeding. Also, the enteral nutrition may directly reduce the immunological and infectious events. They decrease the early transplant-related morbidity and mortality. It's a useful as transitional phase between parenteral nutrition and oral intake. Talking about nurses, we have to say that a qualitative study recently highlighted that nurses, in addition to improving patient experience during the mealtime, more could be done to improve nutritional care in a more imaginative way if they are given the opportunity to act autonomously and have more decision-making power over nutritional care. What more about the recommendation? The tube feeding should be routinely placed before the first signs of mucositis. As I said before, we always try to place the feeding in the day -1. Or at this very early stage, could be in the days +1, but not more than this, because at that point, the mucositis has started. But also early enteral tube feeding should be considered as the first option in the nutritional support of the children undergoing myeloablative conditioning for hematopoietic stem cell transplant, with total parenteral nutrition reserved for those in whom formal approach is not feasible. And also be aware that enteral nutrition along with the parenteral nutrition is highly encouraged. And whenever possible, be aware that both of them are not mutually exclusive. But always in the first choice, we have to choose the enteral nutrition, the tube feeding. As I said, the tube feeding is not mandatory since the day -7, but, We have to avoid to make it in place when the mucositis has started. But just in conclusion, we have to replace the strict neutropenic diet in bone marrow transplant recipients with a more palatable diet. But we don't think that should not result in an increased risk of infection and would improve the quality of life and further result in an increase in oral intake of calories and protein, and will help to prevent undesirable weight loss. Thanks a lot, and open for your question.
So feel free to unmute yourself, Chiara. Can we remove the unmute button and turn on cameras if people want to turn on cameras? And place questions to Eugenia. Thank you very much for sharing an interesting presentation. The topic is quite subjective because different centers do different practices. So I'm glad that you also shown and shared some of the literature as evidence for the practice in your center. So I'm going to ask the first question. Anybody else can ask or put the question in the chat. Eugenia, so in Gosh, I'm from Gosh, and we also have a bone marrow transplant unit. So it's interesting to see your practice. For some type of allogenic complex bone marrow transplant, some of the patients have a PEG or a percutaneous gastrostomy tube in advance of the bone marrow transplant. So does your center do that, or any other centers in Spain do that?
In my center, we avoid to make in place the PEG during the bone marrow transplant period. If the patient has the PEG in place before to start the day -7 or -8, okay, we can use this without any problem, but we try to avoid to put in place during the bone marrow transplant period.
Yeah, I think for our centers, we like a couple of weeks before, because the procedure is done by surgeons. And then it takes time to heal and get used to the tube before the child then starts the conditioning. So that will be the ideal time, way before the bone marrow transplant.
So for us, we have not about experience with the tube feeding. It's not about experience at all, but it's true that there are some patients that they are eating till the day -1, the day 0, the day +1. They are not more because they start eating the best, but after they are going to eating less. But we try to encourage them to eating so many things, but it's true, when we made the tube feeding in place, they stop eating.
Yeah, I think that's
so they stop eating at that moment. So for that reason, that we try that to avoid. Is always a difficult decision, because we try to avoid to make in place the tube feeding when the child is eating. But it's true that they start very quickly the mucositis, and at that moment it's not safe.
Yeah, I agree. So it's determining which is the right time to introduce the tube, although you don't use it immediately for feeding. And then, you see how, at what point, because in the middle of a conditioning regime, even before the marrow goes in or the stem cells go in, their lining starts to break down with mucositis. And also there's the nausea and vomiting. And also, if you have a nasogastric tube, some young patients, when they vomit, they are sick, the tube comes out, and then you have to then repass it. So that's a different, it's about a balance, isn't it?
That happened with a child that we have now. Well, it's a teenager that he arrived to the bone marrow transplant ward with the tube feeding, because before, at the diagnosis and afterward, They had been very, very sick before to start the condition, and he had been very sick during the treatment of the leukemia, and he lost almost 20 kilos. So at that moment, we tried to encourage him to eat a lot, but it's not enough. So we put the tube feeding before the bone marrow transplant, and we try to feed him at night. That has been he has been with enteral nutrition for 12 hours at night. And when he arrived to the bone marrow transplant, he had been vomiting a lot, and the tube had been out several times. So at the end of the day, we decided to stop putting in place again, because at the end we have mucositis and it's not safe to put the tube several times. So
yeah. So there's a question in the chat, Sydney, from London. So the question is, Eugenia, when
yes.
is it recommended after transplant that patients can start having reheated food or takeaways? Like
the
pizza.
takeaway food, it should be at least almost 3 months. They have to recover the neutropenic. That is the first one, because before to recover from the neutropenic period, he can go home. So that is the first question. And the second question, we never know how the takeaway food has been handled. And as I said before, it's the most important thing to clean, to wash the vegetables and everything. So it's not easy to take away because you don't know how it has been prepared. But I have a child also that she start preparing her own sushi because she likes a lot. So now she's preparing her own sushi.
Yeah, so there's a way of preparing your own sushi, which is cooked fish
yes.
rather than raw
Yes.
fish. So in answer to Sydney's question, I guess I want to share the practice here as well. You're right, Eugenia. We must wait for the count recovery, the neutrophils recovery, before considering takeaways, as in food that ordered from stores where they prepare for takeaways. It's different from frozen food. So like frozen fish fingers, frozen nuggets and things like that. They are okay because they are frozen as commercially prepared, and they are fast freeze, isn't it? So we do allow frozen food from the freezer cooked to the right temperature. So your guidance about cook, clean, heat and chill is very, very important. That guidance, isn't it? It's about educating families how to, even for us who are not undergoing bone marrow transplant, it's important to maintain that good nutritional hygiene handling of food. So Sydney, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, so now there's another question here. Someone wants to know whether there's a recommended book, a textbook for bone marrow transplant nutrition, a book, a study book. You're a lecturer, isn't it? So do you recommend any cancer textbook for pediatrics? We can discuss it outside, isn't it? You know, and then we can prepare this for reading.
Yes,
maybe.
they have. I always recommend the handbook for nurses, because the handbook for nurses from the EBMT is a complete handbook about several things on the bone marrow transplant field, and I like a lot this book. So it's in the website of the EBMT, and it's for free. You can download everything, and it's a very, very nice handbook for nurses.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, if you go to the EBMT website, there is literature there, and the handbook for nurses is free. It's free of charge. You can go into EBMT website and download it. Obviously, the different center practice differently. So for young centers that are just starting to launch in bone marrow transplant treatments, you could touch base with the experts like Eugenia, and email Chiara, Michi, if there's any information you wish to have, we can share it because it's good to share practices. But there are some centers that are very well in advance, like Eugenia Center, like Great Ormond Street Hospital Center, and there are many, many more centers. Do reach out to the contacts, okay? So now I have another question. I was thinking about, there are a few questions here, so I'm just thinking about, you know, with the TPN in your center, do you give both Vemin, the glucose kind of liquid, and lipid, the white one, or do you only give one Vemin?
Do you mean if we have the total
TPN.
parental nutrition, the lipid and together or not? Because that changed a bit from the pharmacy. And the people who are prepared and also the composition of the total parental nutrition. There are so many compositions that they are not admitted the lipid. They are not admitted because of the composition of the glucose, amino acids, the mineral, all these things. So they are not admitted the lipids. So in that case, we have to make this separately.
Yeah.
Okay, even if we are the catheter and they have one with the total parenteral nutrition and another with the lipid, and both of them are together in the same point, but they can't be together in the same bag.
Yeah.
That is, they can't be. Sometimes yes.
Yeah.
But sometimes
some
no. It depends on the composition of the total parenteral nutrition.
Yeah, I think the reason why some BMT, the gut, the lipid cause problems with the liver enzymes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's why
Yes.
in
Yes.
some
Yes.
scenarios with high veno-occlusive disease complication, high risk of VOD, they might just omit the lipid bit.
Yes. Yes.
And give
Yes.
the
Yes.
elements, the electrolytes in the glucose solution, the high concentration glucose solution.
Yes.
We normally give TPN via a central line, and that's known practice, isn't it? We rarely give it via peripheral because it's a vesicant. All your patients have CVL. What if the
Yes.
line infection occurs and the CVL comes off? That's a problem, a big problem.
Yeah, that is the big problem. That we all the children when they arrive to the bone marrow transplant, all of them, as in the ghost, and they all of them have a central line. Okay,
Yes.
they have, and sometimes two central line, but we use the total parenteral nutrition, and when the child, for some reason, they are losing the line. So at that case, what we do is we are going to a peripheral, but in that case, we have to change the composition of the total parenteral nutrition because of the risk of phlebitis. So because of the risk of this, we have to change the composition of the total parenteral nutrition at that case.
Yeah. We also have some, in the autologous bone marrow transplant setting, because our autologous bone marrow transplant is done in a different floor in the cancer unit, and the allograft and the haploid and things like that will be done in the bone marrow transplant unit because they need the PPVL rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And in autologous, sometimes while the children is also having TPN, we encourage them to eat orally. Because although we know that the oral intake is not sufficient, but it is important to get the children continuing to chew the food, to get used to the food, although they are having diarrhea. We only probably stop oral intake when the diarrhea is profuse diarrhea. So I think it's important to encourage the oral intake while undergoing bone marrow transplant, but there are some limitations, isn't it, Eugenia?
Yeah, we try to encourage them to eat because the autologous, we always say, no, it's not. We always perform the hematopoietic stem cell transplant in our unit. That means the children are not going to another part of the oncology wall or not. They are all of them in the same bone marrow transplant unit. But it's true that the autologous is like a easy transplant. It's an easy transplant because they don't have immunosuppression, they don't need it. They say, okay, that is only an autologous, but it's not true. Sometimes it's so difficult as the other one, because I have a child a few months ago that they did a BOD perfect,
Yes.
like at um, um, not an autologous, I mean, but they did a BOD perfect and having one autologous. So, and we try to encourage the children to eat, but sometimes if they don't want, they don't want to eat. So we need to try to have some kind of nutrition for them.
Yeah. So I sometimes feel that the autologous patients are
Yeah.
more heavily treated. So they've
Yes.
gone through so much treatment already that their gut and their, all their whole being is in a worse state than, say, another bone marrow transplant allograft that comes in new, like in immunology conditions or in some ALL. They go in with less treatment or intensity when they go into bone marrow transplant. Whereas in autologous, some of the children are so heavily treated, they are so ill already.
Yes,
So
there
if,
are
yeah,
that for us that is often happen in medulloblastoma, that
yes,
they got three procedures, one after another, after another, after another, and when they arrive to the third, they are very not so sick, but they are losing weight. They don't want to eat. So the first one is easy, the first one,
yes,
but not the second one and not the third one. And that happened the same with the neuroblastoma. The
yes.
neuroblastoma is always an autologous, but it's a very difficult bone
Yeah,
marrow transplant also, even if it's autologous.
yeah.
The
It's
only
very,
thing
very
that
challenging.
yeah, the only thing
Challenging.
that they
Yeah.
don't have is the immunosuppression, but they have all the
All
things.
the toxicity of the past chemotherapy that they have, isn't
Yes,
it? Worsens the
yes.
gut. Now, another question I have is that the colonization of the gut. Okay,
Mm.
that's a hot topic, isn't it? Yeah,
Yes.
and I haven't searched the literature lately, and I wondered what's your opinion in scenarios where one would consider decolonizing the gut and then recolonizing it. I don't think it's recommended in pediatric practice at the moment, but what is your opinion?
That is not, it is a difficult question. It's a
Yeah,
difficult question because even if we have colonized the gut, always the trophism
yeah,
has to be maintained, always. Even if we have a tube feeding with 2 centimeters per hour, but between 2 and 5 is enough. Okay, and you have the trophism. It's safe for the infection, is better for the patient, and you can always maintain the trophism of the gut. So it's the most important thing that only you don't need to have a lot of nutrition or a big amount of centimeters of the nutrition. Only 5 centimeters per hour is enough in order to have the trophism of the gut.
yeah. It's about keeping the microbiome,
Yes,
the
yes,
natural
yes, yes.
flora. Yes.
Is almost, it's not mandatory, but almost.
Yeah. So now in PSYOP Europe, you shared with me that one of your colleague, one of your staff is doing a research to
Yes,
check the
yes.
microbiome in the before during the transplant of a patient. How is that going? Can you
It's
explain a little bit
perfect.
of
That
that
means
research?
is now the research is going. She's always working with us, and the research is going. We will share with you when we have the data and we have the result and everything. We will share with you because we have been working on this now.
Yeah, I think watch this space is very interesting to all the
Yes.
people who are participating here. And if you want to join the group, PSYOP Europe, we can discuss more about the topic of nutrition in bone marrow transplant. We're going to end the conversation and discussion. If
Mhm.
there are no more further questions on the chat, I don't see any more questions. It's just nice and short and sweet. So thank you, Eugenia, for your presentation. And I would like to share with you the feedback link, the QR code. it's very important that we feedback so that we can inform the next session how we should progress further. Okay, so please scan the QR code or click on the link in the chat. I'm going to copy the link, and then you could click on the link, do it on your phones or your device, and give us feedback. Very important, because we're going to organize the next one, which is going to be presented by another team. And I'm going to share that information here on the slide before you go. Don't go yet. And the next webinar will be held on the 15th of September, around this time, and presented by the team from Princess Maxima in Utrecht. Okay, and I don't know if any of you are going to SIOP in Amsterdam. I'm not, yeah, unfortunately, but Eugenia is going. And hopefully you all, some of you will be there, and you can touch base. Yeah, and Chiara, there is a desk information booth of SIOP Europe, isn't it, in Amsterdam? I think.
It will be.
Yes, there will be.
Yeah, so it's quite exciting. If people could link in and continue the networking, that would be good, okay? We'll get more information about the next webinar to all of you and to your centers so that you can share it in case people want to join. And it's about blenderized tube feeding and integrative medicine, the parents' wishes. I think it's quite important, the blenderized tube feeding. I know my center don't do it, but I'm curious as to how Princess Maxima does it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you to the speaker, and thank you to Chiara, who has organized the session. And I wish you all a happy September Goal Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. I'm sure you're doing your bit to promote it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eugenia.
Thank you.